Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes, it's visible.
So all of the students, please participate because I want this to be like as interactive as possible. And if possible, you can also sit with note and pen and do some of the calculations. It would be interesting. So, okay, finally, yesterday, this is where we had stopped. Uh, and I will recap what we had done here. Is basically we want to calculate the, so we have a recombination process going on of recombination of hydrogen at around redshift 1000. And we want to see what is the um, where it basically stops, where there is recombination. I mean, does it go completely all the way to zero, or is there some residual ionization fraction of the recombination? So for that, what we want to do is what basically stops this recombination process, and that is the expansion of the universe. So once the universe has started expanding, certain like certain this thing, we cannot. Okay, just give me a minute. Can I will pause. I will start sharing again. Just stop sharing and start sharing again. Okay. This,
Sorry, is there any problem?
sorry, my Zoom is actually Zoom screen is covering the toolbar, so I had to shift the toolbar. Yeah,
It's okay.
yeah, it's done fine. So basically, now we need to figure out what is this recombination, residual ionization fraction. So this is the recombination rate. That this is the this number density of electrons, and then we have wait a minute. Just give me another minute. Okay.
Maybe you don't do a full screen on your that toolbar thing and keep it a bit smaller than the whole window.
Yeah. Is this visible fine now? No problem.
Yeah, it's visible. Yeah.
Okay. So this is not a full screen now. Anyways, so we have
Yeah, that's fine.
basically, okay, so basically now we are going to compare the recombination rate, which is the case two recombinations, times the number density of electrons. And this number density is going to be a function of redshift because the number density of all the particles are decreasing as redshift cube. So this is the number density of electrons, and then we compare this with the Hubble rate. So we had done this yesterday, and somebody had given correct answer also. So this is the basically we have the number density of electrons as a function of redshift. So now what is going on over here is that at any given redshift, if the Saha ionization, I mean, if the recombination was taking place according to Saha ionization equation, in that case, once the ionization fraction falls below certain value, the recombination is going to slow down because now the recombination rate is much slower than the expansion rate of the universe. So now because the recombination is taking place at our, we have redshift of recombination to be around 1100, we can put in this value and we get certain value of Xe. So this is like an order of magnitude calculations of the residual ionization fraction. We compare the ionization recombination rate with the Hubble expansion rate. So now this is going to play an important role in the rest of the history of this cosmic dawn and the dark matter, dark ages. So what we Now, finally, the only thing that is left is to calculate the evolutions of the kinetic temperature during the dark ages, after the recombinations and before the structures, new structures are started forming. And once the new structures start forming, there will be a lot of new astrophysics, which we cannot calculate very precisely. So there are lots of models for that. But during the dark ages, before the structures have actually started forming, things can be calculated very precisely. At least if you constrain, say for example, lambda CDM model. So this is the equation for lambda CDM model, and what we have. So this is basically the evolutions of kinetic temperature, and this is the temperature of the all the matter gas, and this is the temperature of CMB. So this is the all the relativistic particles. Now, if for example you can, if you do not have lambda CDM model, if you have something else, the way Shiva has been describing recently, you can change this. That this is what would change. So, anyways, this is basically the CMB temperature, and what is happening is first the non-relativistic kinetic temperature is going to fall as this. So this is the adiabatic cooling due to just the expansion of the universe. But there is a second term which comes because these free electrons in the medium are interacting with the CMB photons, and these interactions, once after they interact, they are sharing their energy between these many particles. So basically, number of electrons are going to be, so the total number of particles are going to be uh, number of electrons and number of protons and number of neutral atoms. So neutral atoms, I'll put all these helium atoms also. So this is the total number of particles that you have, and this total number of particles is, if you write it in this fraction, it's going to be this is the ionization fraction. So this is n times x. This is also the ionization fraction because we are assuming that only hydrogen is has certain ionization fraction. So these two are equal. So this and these things all combined will be n, uh, 1 minus x. So the total is going to be n times x plus n, which is n times 1 plus x. So basically, the total, this is n, I mean, this is different than this n. This is the total number density of baryons, whereas this is the total number density of particles. And these particles can be counted twice if it is ionized. So electrons and protons will be counted separate. So which means that if this fraction of electron is sharing its energy between this fraction of the particles, total particles, and whatever energy it, and finally you can put values of all these constants which I have given here, and this is the difference between CMB temperature and the kinetic temperature. So what these terms try to do is that, say for example, if you assume that kinetic temperature was through certain mechanism, through any mechanism, if it was larger than CMB, then this term would be negative, and this would add negative contribution in this, which means that the CMBs are cooling the baryons. But normally what we have is, because of this term, this baryons are colder than CMB. So generally during this time we have this assumption, or this is the reality, unless there is some exotic mechanism of heating. So in this case, what CMB, this term, does is it heats up the medium. So there is this rate of cooling, and then this there is heating. Now, how for how long is this effect important? Are the baryons always thermally coupled to CMB, or do they decouple at some point? So for that, we can calculate something called the rate. I mean, so this is the time scale of coupling of, so basically this is just this factor, and this is the time scale of coupling of baryons with CMB, and then we can compare that with the time scale of cooling, which is the Hubble scale. So, so we can compare this with the Hubble time scale, and we do that, And so what we get is, if you put in the values, basically, this is what you will get. So I can just write it very briefly, or if somebody wants to solve it, they can try. So let's just take care of all the correct Hubble, correct redshift factors. So we have this is, and this is the time scale of heating. Then we compare it with the time scale of cooling. So that's going to be h half times, because we are in the matter dominated universe. These factors would be different if it was not a matter dominated universe. So we can then calculate it more precisely, and we have uh, this CMB temperature is definitely falling as this thing. So this is basically a function of z. So we can write that in terms of z now, and we have 8 to 4. So these all quantity is raised to 4, and this thing divided by, so the factor of z that you get, these all rest of the all quantities are constant, or at least this is a cosmological constant. You can still put the value of this, and it gives a factor, and which is a function of z raised to this. So this is what we have written, that z is a certain constant times the this factor. So now basically what is this telling is that depending on the ionization fraction, residual ionization fraction, at still certain redshift, the heating rate is larger than the cooling rate, which means that the the baryon temperature remains close to CMB temperature instead of falling as the adiabatic temperature. And this is the threshold, sort of threshold redshift. So you can calculate that for the residual ionization fraction of 10 to power minus 4, which we had derived earlier. And it turns out to be around 120. So what that means is around redshift of 120, even after, so recombination takes place at around redshift 1100. And at that time, the matter and CMB has decoupled, so they, which means that they are now, CMB is not scattering off from matter sufficiently to change the spectrum of CMB. So basically, after redshift 1100, the spectrum of CMB does not change very large. There will be there will be other effects, secondary anisotropies, but it's not as large as what was happening till 1100. But the matter is still completely being dominated by the temperature evolution of CMB and not falling at it as it should. So this is the threshold redshift, and this is what Shiv had shown earlier, this plot, that for different values of residual ionization, you get different temperature evolution. If anyone has questions in this, we can discuss. Does this make sense? Say for example, for this curve, around redshift 120 will be something somewhere here. So till say this redshift, it will be falling as close to CMB, and then it starts falling as straight lines adiabatically. And there is obviously, because um, this is not a just simple phase transition. So there will be an extended period in which both the effects of heating and cooling are both playing role. But after that, this is almost adiabatic cooling. So is that fine? Okay, now finally we come to again what we want to do now. This points will be discussed in much more detail by Tirth next week, I hope so. I'm not going to cover in much in detail the ionization part of this thing, but we still need to say something, that what is basically happening here is that there is around, I mean, basically there are sources which are being formed in a certain overdense regions. So once these overdensities start collapsing and the sources start forming in these regions, it will emit this ionizing radiation. So this is like the number of ionizing photons emitted per the source per time per unit time. So this is the number of ionizing photons which we have. Now we want to calculate what region, how large a region can this number of photons ionize. So for that, what we need to do is basically compare the rate of ionization again with the rate of recombination. So the rate of recombination is the recombination coefficient in this case, and times. Okay, so here, because the recombination photons can redshift, I mean, because this is an ionized region, we can take the um, case A recombination coefficient. So I'll keep this open and then we'll discuss what recombination coefficient should we take. So this is the recombination coefficient, and this number density of electrons, number density of protons. Um, and this is the rate of recombination per unit volume. So now we need to multiply it by volume. And we say that if this source is able to ionize a volume this much, then we multiply it by that volume. So this is the volume that is being ionized by this source. So we then put the equated here. There is also another factor here, which is that within these regions, there might be small clouds which are not large enough to form sources. So, which means that they are not emitting, but they are large enough, which means that within this region, recombination dominates, and which means that they will act as a sink for this ionizing photons. So we take into account the effect of all these s- uh, sort of small regions as in a clustering coefficient. So um, which gives us basically this, and we can calculate. So this is called a Stromer-Grain sphere. So this is generally what people calculate in astrophysics, local universe, and we can calculate the radius for this Stromer-Grain sphere, which is basically simply just equating this with this, and this is what we get. This is a clumping factor, which I just tried to explain. And now this is in the case of static universe. So in case of static universe, the number density of electrons and number density of protons is not changing. So basically this is the case in case of static universe. What we have is basically an expanding universe. In expanding universe, you can define not just the physical radius of the Stromer-Grain sphere, you can also calculate the co-moving radius, and this co-moving radius is the physical radius times 1 plus z factor. However, because of this number densities, because the number densities are falling, uh, this with evolution of redshift, these bubbles are basically expanding. So you might think that if you are putting this factor, it might, I don't know, become smaller, but that is not the case, because the number density of electrons and number density of protons is also decreasing, which means that the recombination is becoming less efficient, which means that the same amount of ionizing photons emitted from the source is now able to ionize a larger radius, which means that this co-moving radius of the source is also increasing. So basically this, and if there are, because as with the expansion of the universe, there will be more sources will be forming within this. And so in short, this ionized regions will be evolving with time, expanding with time, and then nearby ionized regions will start merging with each other, and the whole universe will be ionized by redshift 6 or so. So this is just the basic of recombination, but I'm not going to be talking anything more about this ionized regions, and I'll just talk about just assume that there are ionized regions, and then talk about what happens to the neutral medium by the sources which are emitted from the ionized regions. Okay, any questions? Okay.
Uh, can you explain the clumping factor once again?
Yeah, so the clumping factor is so this comes because, okay, so I will just explain in a, I mean, I'm not going to derive it mathematically, but say for example, assume there is a cloud here which is very dense. So what happens to dense clouds mostly is that they start collapsing on within each, I mean within itself, and it will form structures, right? But if say for example this cloud is not able to cool, because Shiv talked about cooling today. So say for example this is gravitationally bound very dense region of, I mean of gas, but it is not able to cool sufficiently fast enough to start forming structures. So basically, this is a clump of neutral gas. Now, what happens within this region is, because the density is very large, the recombinations, because the recombination is proportional to the number density of electrons and protons, so it's a square of number density. So if the number density is large, the recombinations are very fast within this region. So which means that all the source ionizing photons which go within this region, they do not actually ionize this whole region, and they will be absorbed within just the boundary of this region, which means that this region will act as a sink for the ionizing photons. So a certain fraction of these ionizing photons, basically you can write that as this. So certain fraction of this ionizing photons is already absorbed by these clumps, and only the rest of the photons which do not encounter such clumps will be able to ionize the hydrogens in the rest of the medium. Is that fine?
Yes, thank you.
So, okay, finally, I'll be talking about the two fields which I wanted to discuss today, are the X-rays and the Lyman alpha. So for X-rays, you can generally assume that the sources emit in a power law. So this is the integrated luminosity of the sources, and this is the exact number of photons emitted per unit time per frequency range, which is again a power law, which means it is following something like this. So for the different powers of alpha, different alpha, you can say that there are, so the large value of alpha, the slope is steeper, which means that the large energy photons basically are going to be large energy photons. This is frequency. So large frequency or large energy photons are less in number compared to the high energy photons, which means that the spectra is soft if the alpha is large, and that means, now we will see, this affects the way heating proceeds. Fine. Okay. So Shiv today talked briefly about how this heating takes place, and what happens is, say for example, this is an ionized region. So there are sources of X-rays, etc. here, and it emits an X-ray photon. Now, it does not interact with most of the, I mean, it might get absorbed by dust, etc., within the sources, but within an ionized regions, it will not interact. So it will free stream into the neutral medium. And within this neutral medium, it might interact with a hydrogen atom, or a neutral helium atom. So in that case, it emits a very energetic photoelectrons. It ionizes these atoms, and that emits very energetic photoelectrons. And these electrons cause further excitations, ionizations, and eventually through collisions, they also cause heating of the medium. So this is the three processes done by these photoelectrons, which was emitted through the excitation of hydrogen and helium by X-ray. So is that fine? Now, people have studied this excitations and ionization fraction caused by this kind of X-rays uh, way back in 80s, and they have done simulations to show that um, as long as the ionization fraction is small, a large fraction of the, so this is basically as a function of energy of the emitted photoelectron. So photoelectron which is emitted, its energy is being distributed between excitation, ionization and heating. So they are not shown excitation, but the ionization and heating is shown. So a fraction of its photo energy goes into ionization, but only until a certain fraction of ionization is achieved. Once this fraction of ionization is achieved, then the energy that goes into ionization drops, which means that these X-ray photons are not very efficient for ionization. Even though they cause these ionizations, the overall ionization caused by these X-ray photons is less than is around 10%, not larger than that. So this remain, even if there is a large fraction of X-ray here, this rest of the medium remains more or less neutral. So we have just neutral medium here. Uh, on the other hand, what happens is this is the fraction of energy that goes into heating, which means that once the energy fraction of energy that goes into heating for large small ionization is around 0.15, but once the 10% of the ionization is reached, most of the energy of the emitted photoelectron goes into heating, which means that a very large fraction of this, most of the effect of this X-ray is basically just heating. This causes a large amount of heating. So most of the heating which we consider is through X-rays. There are other sources of heating. So some of them Shiv had mentioned, like Lyman alpha, which might be possible, which might be important, but it is not. And there are also shock heating, say for example, or there might be some other exotic mechanisms, but the only heating which very most important one so far is the heating through X-rays. So this is the role that X-rays play in the process during of reionization and cosmic dawn. Now we can calculate how far will this X-ray penetrate into their surrounding medium. So if they are emitted from a neutral, I mean an ionized region, how far will they go into a neutral medium? So for that we can calculate the optical depth and we can calculate the mean free path. So that's what we will do. So this is a simple definition of optical depth. And in this case, it actually, there is, I have given this full derivations calculation in my notes, but I'm not going to derive it here because we do not have much time. So what I'm going to just show is that there is a, this is the cross section of interaction of X-ray with a neutral hydrogen or helium atom. These are approximate fit. This does not come from so this comes from experimental fits and not from any core physics. And this is not exactly very precise. If you want to see precise, then this factor will change a little. So, but we can use this to very well degree. It just changes a few percent. So what we have is that the cross section decreases as the frequency cubes. So this is the ionizing frequency of hydrogen or helium, and this is the cross section for the ionization. So this is the ionizing energy, And this is the cross section for the ionization for both the helium and hydrogen. And everything will be using, even frequency will be using in electron volt here. So this is all in electron volts. And what we see is that the cross section decreases as this vector. So the cross n, but on the other hand, we also have this number density. And this number density is a function of, is also is a function of redshift. And so this frequency, these two factors cancel out, and what we have is just this neat expression, where here this L gamma is the light travel distance. So we need to be careful not to use co-moving distance over here, because these distances are very large, and this is the path that is traveled by a photon. So it makes sense to use light travel or physical quantities and not the co-moving quantities. So this is basically the light travel distance. And we can expand this basically to account for the contribution of neutral hydrogen and neutral helium. And this is the expression that we get. So this is a function of redshift at which these photons were emitted. So this is the redshift of the source. And this is the frequency that was emitted from the source. So this is the emitted frequency. And then there is just this neat factor. So what we have is, this is a function of number density of a hydrogen atom, the cross-section, ionizing cross-section of hydrogen, and then the ionizing frequency of hydrogen. So putting these values of electron volts, can somebody calculate at least one of this factor?
Yeah, Janki, there is one question by Anindita. She is asking, what does it mean by light travel distance?
Okay, I had talked about that yesterday, but so basically in cosmology you can define different kind of distances, and one of the distance basically you have is that so basically this is, say for example, you have these two sources. You can say basically just source and sink, or you can say these are two different, one is the source and one is the observer. And you can calculate, so basically in an expanding universe you can fix a grid on them, and you can calculate the distance between these two, and that will be in that fixed grid. So this grid is not changing with the expanding universe. So within that fixed grid you can have this co-moving distance. However, when the photon actually travels, this is not the distance that it travels. What it travels is, it moves from here, from the source, and while it is traveling, this observer is moving away. So it travels a certain extra distance, certain different distance, and that is the light travel distance that you calculate using the cosmology. So for example, you can calculate this very precisely for lambda CDM universe, and that's what we use. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, hopefully, I think you can carry on.
If somebody has question, they can unmute and ask also, if possible.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is basically, if anybody calculated that or not, I don't know, but these are the values. So basically for this is the contribution from hydrogen, and this is the contribution from helium, and this is the total contribution. Now we can similarly, so we can put in these values and calculate the optical depth for given frequency and given redshift. So this is one of the questions which I have given you in the tutorial sheet which I gave yesterday, that calculate these distances for different combinations of redshift and combinations of this frequency. And you will see that they change by orders of magnitude when this when you change this frequency by say 1 order of magnitude. So, and what this basically means is that sometimes a photon which is emitted at very large redshift might not get absorbed even till redshift very small. So let's calculate the mean free path, which is mean free path is basically when you put tau equals 1 and you calculate this path. So this is mean free path. And this is the same expression, the inverse of it. And this is the values that it turns out. So basically, if you see that this is in, first of all, this is megaparsec order, and this is supposed to be in electron volt cube, electron volt. So what we have is that if you, for frequency around 100 electron volt, you will have path of around tens of kiloparsec, approximate value. But when this is kilo electron volt, this becomes 1 megaparsec. And if you calculate it even further, for say, for example, 10 kilo electron volt, you will have some like even 1000 megaparsec, which means it will be like, say, if the photon was emitted at redshift 15, it might get absorbed at redshift 8. It has mean free path of around redshift 8, so large, if the photon had high enough energy. So while calculating X-rays, which do not generally take into account the effect of such large frequencies, and we can generally neglect them. So this is, and finally, the final thing I want to say about X-rays is that we can calculate the fraction of probability of absorption by hydrogen and probability of absorption by helium. So which is basically just this ratio. And it turns out this, which means that around 2/3 of the absorption is done by hydrogen and 1/3 by helium, which means that in this case, the effect of helium is very important and we need to include that. Second field which I want to talk today is the optical depth, and is the Lyman alpha field, and we'll be calculating the same thing again, optical depth and mean free path. So these are all the relevant numbers for Lyman alpha, and there are a lot of them because the Lyman alpha has a very important line, and she has talked a lot about it. So I will just be calculating numbers instead of explaining all the effects that it has on the 21 centimeter signal and the coupling, etc. But I will also be calculating the exact value of the coupling coefficient that we use, which is Y alpha, maybe in this tutorial or the next tutorial. So this is basically the cross section for Lyman alpha, and it is a function of this line profile. Now this line profile for Lyman alpha is, as Shiv had shown, it's very sharply peaked, and you can approximate. So basically, given this kind of line profile, you can approximate this as 1 by delta nu, delta nu, which is this. Sorry, this is the delta nu, and so we can calculate the line profile function as 1 by delta nu. That is the approximation that I'll be using in this tutorial. So that is the, and we can calculate the values of this rest of the coefficients. So if somebody wants, they can calculate from either this or this, and you will get this value, centimeter square. And this is the line profile function. So this is the approximation that we'll be using for this optical depth. Now this, sorry, this is not the optical depth, this is the resonance width. Now this resonance width, in this case, I'm going to assume it is the Doppler resonance width. But in case of Lyman alpha, it will also have contribution from the natural broadening, which means this should be ideally a void profile, but I'll only take into account just the Doppler broadening. And that has a form of this. So we can calculate these values of these constants as a function of Hertz, as a function of temperature. So basically, if you see, this is around 1/5 of the frequency of the Lyman alpha line, which means that this is a good approximation. Anyone has any questions till this point?
No, there is none. You can carry on.
Okay. So now we calculate the optical depth, which is again this standard function. Here, in this case, only we are taking into account hydrogen because we are talking about Lyman alpha. And it has now this, now, okay, basically you can calculate this. So generally what happens in optical depth is that you will have a cloud of photon, a cloud of gas, and you'll be calculating the optical depth in space of this particular this particular cloud. So that is how the optical depth is defined. But this is a different kind of optical depth in which this calculation is limited not by space, because the hydrogen, because the neutral hydrogen is there on all the, it's the whole universe is neutral at this point. However, it is limited by the resonance width. So this is called the Gunn-Peterson optical depth, and it is basically this DL you can calculate for the expanding universe, and that is C dz, sorry, h of z h of z 1 plus z. So this is the expression for dz, negative sign. And you can write that as a function of frequency. So this will be, because dz by 1 plus z is d nu by nu, which is in this case is alpha. So this is the expression you get for dl. So let's put this here. D alpha is equal to integration. This is the cross section, and these things are the number of hydrogens at present times the redshift correction, and then the neutral fraction. So this is this value, and then finally we will put in here this thing. So if this was basically, this was emitted at time, basically L corresponding to L of source to L of observation, then in that case it will be around, it will be reversed. So this is basically redshift source, the other way around, because of this minus sign. And then that's what you have. Okay, so we do this, put in these values, and you expand this Hubble constant for the matter-dominated universe again. So what you have is, and if you cancel this factor, finally what you get is, this is the cross section, the ionization fraction raised to 3 by 2 C by dz. And if you now expand this here, you will have a factor which is basically this. Let's put this equal to 0. So let's call this is sigma 0, and then there is this. So this nu by nu alpha d nu, and this we know is the definition 1. So this only remains this factor. This is going from, okay. So this is basically what it turns out. And I have put in the values here finally. This is what it turns out, and I put in these values. And this is the Gunn-Peterson optical depth again, which I have asked you to calculate in the tutorial. Please do these calculations on your own again, and make sure that what the figure I have written here is correct, because this is used very extensively in the reionization studies. And because of this Peterson optical depth, we get a lot of information, almost all the information that we know about reionization currently, apart from CMB. So that was the optical depth. And then we have mean free path. So this mean free path is this inverse, and we can calculate similarly the mean free path of the Lyman alpha photons as a function of temperature. And it is much smaller. It is of the order of parsec. It is of the order of parsec, not megaparsec, not kiloparsec. It is of the order of parsec. But it is a very large function of redshift. It decreases with increasing redshift, which means that during cosmic dawn, say put around redshift equals 20, you will have this even much smaller than this, which means that the Lyman alpha mean free path in neutral medium is very small. You should calculate the mean free path of recombination photon in neutral medium. That is also one of the questions in tutorial. So finally, this is the mean free path, and the now what we can calculate is that what happens to Lyman alpha is that Lyman alpha photons are scattered from one neutral hydrogen to another neutral hydrogen. It causes excitations, and then that neutral hydrogen de-excites and emits another Lyman alpha. So there is scattering of Lyman alpha through the medium from one neutral atom to another neutral atom. And but during each of this scattering, the universe is expanding, which means that during each of this scattering, the Lyman alpha shifts its frequency a very tiny bit, and we can calculate this redshift between mean free path. So this is basically the path between scattering is the mean free path, which we calculated. So given this mean free path, we can calculate what redshift or what is the frequency change that it experiences during this mean free path. Right. So we calculate that, and that is this quantity. So this is the mean. This is the decrease in frequency between each scattering on average. So now, if the Lyman alpha photons were being scattered n number of times, then it would redshift by n times this much. Right? Is this point clear? Okay. So this is the average scattering, average decrease in frequency for each scattering. Now we can calculate its value based on putting all this value for mean free path from here. And then we can calculate the total number of scattering. So this is the total number of scattering which the Lyman alpha, if say for example, if a Lyman alpha photon, so this is say the line profile function, and if a Lyman alpha photon redshifted to this frequency, and then it would redshift out of this. So while it is within this, how many number of scattering will it have while it is within this region? So that we can calculate. So this is the resonance width, and this is the decrease in redshift per scattering. So we can calculate the number of scattering, and we do that. And if you see, this expression is exactly the same as this. So this is basically this optical depth is giving you this number of scattering, and we can calculate that comes out correct. There is another quantity, which is because if instead of this Lyman alpha photon entering the resonance from here, if they entered the resonance here in the middle, which is what would happen if this Lyman alpha was generated through recombinations or through excitations. In that case, this is the it would be injected from the here. So these are two kind of Lyman alpha photons which we consider for the cosmic dawn. One is that are redshifted to Lyman alpha line, and another which are injected to the Lyman alpha line. So these are the injected photons. And for injected, the number of scatterings would be about half of this. So these are all on average quantities, but they are still, because there is large number of atoms and there's large number of scattering, they average to comparatively precise values. Okay. Any questions in this?
Yeah, so far none. Yeah, carry on. Yeah.
Okay, I hope this is clear. That's why there are no questions, and not because it is absolutely not clear. Okay. Finally, I'll cover this last topic today, and then I'll stop. In this tutorial, and then I'll cover the rest of it in the next tutorial. So what we have is basically, now this was the in general Lyman alpha. This is what happens for Lyman alpha anywhere. This is what happens to Lyman alpha during recombination, or during cosmic dawn, or during the end of reionization. for all these things which we talked so far applies. The number of scattering, the optical depth, the mean free path, the cross section, everything is applies to all these things. But during the cosmic dawn, something very specific happens. And this was one of the questions asked today during Shiv's talk, is that if the mean free path of Lyman alpha photon is so small, they should be observed very close to the medium, right? And not, their effect should not be even spread to far away distance. Then why is the spreading? And that is because they redshift. So imagine a photon which is emitted from here, and it was emitted at frequency just below Lyman beta frequency. So we have nu beta is larger than nu alpha. So if this photon was emitted at just smaller than Lyman beta, then it is out of the resonance width of Lyman beta. And so which means that there is nothing in this region, if there are no molecules. If there are molecules, they will absorb these photons. But if there are no molecules, and we can safely take that assumptions at very high redshift. So if there are no molecules, this photon will free stream into the medium. In the ionized region and in the neutral region, there is nothing that can absorb this. So it will free stream and it will keep on getting redshifted. So while it is redshifting, at certain point, its frequency will enter the Lyman alpha resonance width. And the place where it enters the Lyman alpha resonance width, it will have a very large number of scatterings, which is what we calculated. And these scatterings will cause a number of things, which is basically that the color temperature of Lyman alpha, which was in the beginning should have been very large, it will now become, it will couple with the kinetic temperature. And the other effect that will happen is the spin temperature will couple to the Lyman alpha temperature. And in effect, the spin temperature will couple to the kinetic temperature. So this is the coupling which is done by this Lyman alpha. And after this n number of scatterings, which we calculated and scatter, these will again redshift off to far away, because now they have moved out of Lyman alpha resonance width, and there is nothing which will absorb these photons in absence of molecules. Similar things will happen to a photon which is, say, which has a very redshift just smaller than Lyman beta. It will travel a little shorter distance, and then it will redshift to the frequency of Lyman beta, and it will get absorbed. You can calculate this kind of distance, like the distance it will travel for various different frequencies of Lyman series lines. And that's what we will call this influence region, and we will calculate that here. Is this point clear? Okay. So for Lyman series line, this is the expression that the frequency is proportional to it's a function of this n, and we will calculate the maximum distance that the Lyman alpha photon, which or basically a photon will travel before it redshifts to the next Lyman series line, and we'll calculate this here for the Lyman beta photon. So if the Lyman beta photon was emitted from the source, how far away will it transfer before it is redshifted to Lyman alpha? And the effect of this source, so basically there might be another photon which is emitted at even more lower frequency, so it will travel certain else and travel to Lyman alpha. So all the regions within this distance can get certain Lyman alpha contribution from this source, but beyond this there will be none. So this is the maximum distance of influence regions of this source for Lyman alpha, and we can calculate this. We can put in this. So basically, this is again the light travel distance, and this light travel distance you can calculate the precise value in matter-dominated universe. So this is all for matter-dominated universe, and now because we have that frequency is proportional to 1 plus z, you can instead take out this z factors and put in the frequency factors, and doing that, you get this kind of expression. So now this expression is valid for all Lyman series lines, but specifically for just Lyman beta to Lyman alpha transition, this is the value. So this distance is around 1422 megaparsec, which is very large, which means that the influence of Lyman alpha, the influence of a source for Lyman alpha is very large. Now, mind that this is just one quantity where the Lyman alpha can reach. It does not mean that the number of Lyman alpha reaching here is large enough to have a very significant effect on the spin temperature or kinetic temperature. It might be a very small fraction of number density of Lyman alpha photons, but they are still able to reach here. So this is one quantity which we need. The another quantity which we will need is the number density of Lyman alpha photons which are reaching here. And that will depend on the source properties, what fraction of Lyman alpha, what is the luminosity of Lyman alpha photons. So I will stop here, and I'll cover the rest of the Lyman alpha in the next tutorial in the afternoon.
Thanks, Janki. Thanks for this wonderful tutorial. So it's time to have some questions. So if in case you have any questions, you can go on and ask.
Yeah.
Hi Janki, I have a question, like maybe I missed the point. You have said that the X-ray, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear, go on.
So X-ray photons cannot ionize the medium efficiently and can lead to the heat. So what is the physical reason for that? Maybe you have said, I have somehow missed.
Okay, so what you need to, physical reason for that is that this is a photoelectron. Okay, it has a certain, so what X-ray does is it will ionize the medium and it will create a photoelectron. And now this photoelectron will interact with the neutral medium. Okay, so that is what it will do. And depending on you can actually basically calculate very precisely what is the different cross sections of this photoelectrons with different particles, neutral hydrogen, neutral helium, protons, etc. And you can see what effect does it has. So, in what it turns out is that it causes a small this electron is, because it's very energetic, it does sometimes ionize the it does sometimes encounter the neutral hydrogen or neutral helium, and it does sometimes able to ionize it, but its cross sections with neutral medium is for ionization is very small, which means that most of the what it happens is it just simply interacts and heats up the medium. Now, another thing which happens, which is basically shown by here, is that once it has ionized a certain number of atoms, say for example 10% of the atoms, once it has ionized, then it has large number of ionized electrons and protons, and so it will mostly interact with those ionized basically electrons and free electrons and protons, and give away all its energy in heat instead of causing further ionization. Is that fine?
Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, that's the last call. If there is any more question, you can raise your hand and ask, or simply ask the question.
Yeah, you can ask over the Slack later if you want.
Yeah. That they can also do, but I'm just giving them time. Yeah. So thanks, Janki, for this wonderful session. So we will now close this session and we'll come back around 2:30 as usual. So yeah, so goodbye for this session. Yeah, thank you.